Alright, check it out. We're going in a deep dive for some big stencil tutorials here. So basically, I've always run into the issue of not being able to print stencils large enough. Now this is multiple sheets all stacked up together. So here I'm going to teach you how to go through that process and kind of the supplies you'll need. You can also see there's this mesh over top, and this is a new technique that I'm trying out for the first time here. It's basically a method that you can get rid of any need for islands in your stencil. So normally if you have any white sections in your design that are totally surrounded by black, they would kind of just fall out. This lets you have these little bits and areas hold on to the rest of the stencil and look great. So really excited with the results after I went through the whole process. So the supplies for the project are pretty straightforward. You're going to need some glues and whatnot, but most importantly is that screen mesh. This is just from Home Depot. Go check out kind of the screen door section in the back and you'll be able to find not only the gray stuff, they've got some white as well as black if you got any preference on color, but sizing was pretty much limited to, this little bit of a finer mesh. Worked out in the end for me, so I can recommend that. As far as the glues, I've got some temporary spray tack as well as some permanent spray tack. The temporary is not essential, but you definitely need to go for some of the permanent stuff. I really like the Elmer's glue one. It worked pretty well and kind of covered all my bases there, and then also went for the basic Elmer's glue. You'll be using that to glue some of the paper of the stencil down into the mesh itself. So I was using a poker spreader piece to spread around the glue into the mesh and onto the stencil, so that worked well to not get your hands as dirty. And then also, of course, you got your X-acto Blade. Cutting mat is essential as well. You're going to need a surface that you're able to cut your stencil out onto, and then straight edge helped me cut the edges of my poster down nicely. So without further ado, let's get into the skull design process. So I first came in on this design through just pencil and paper, sketching out my ideas. I'd also done a rough sketch, kind of cropping and kind of collaging together the concept on Photoshop, but then I kind of reoriented myself and wanted to hand draw this all to start. Kind of had this swirling pattern idea for all the shading and just picked the skull as it was, a pretty iconic style of an image to utilize, and I figured it would lend itself well to this project. So went for that and kind of blocked in my darkest colors and the shading that I was gonna kind of trace after, just because I figured once getting digitally it was going to be a little bit harder to make those design choices, and I felt I was going to be kind of working in circles if I didn't at least do it all out once up by hand and work from there. And once bringing it onto the computer, my favorite way to actually make the stencil is to use the pen tool. Not only does it give you the best kind of vector, really clean line and super perfect black and white, it shows you what the final design is going to look like, because you're able to isolate the layers and the colors in the case when you do multiple all by themselves. So really just working around and drawing the shape you want. Put as many points or little nodes down as you want. Originally with my design I was doing a ton of little nodes and making it kind of jumpy and a little bit scattered, but I found that I kind of smoothed things out as I kept going and worked it to be a little bit smoother of a transition between each of the corners on the shading portion, and that also kind of correlated well with this kind of warp design I'm putting in the backdrop. It figured that that was a nice big focal point in the background, and if I was able to maintain that similar style in the foreground of the skull, I figured that would complement well. So ran with that and kind of smoothed things out after doing the first pass with coloring. And now I didn't stick with those original colors you saw towards the end, but it was a cool practice to get your shades down and just really work on the value that each of the portions were going to be, and not be super committed to the colors up front. And the nodes of the pen tool are super easy to edit, going back in, just holding that control key, going selecting your node, and even picking up other ones to smooth them out after you do get that general line down. Really makes for a kind of smooth process. I'll talk way deeper on the multicolor tutorial, as that has a bunch of considerations with the different layers you got to do. But here, baseline, just get the black and white down. Really rough to start off, and then I work back to refine it and pull off my black layer from all the other colors and put it onto just the same layer as that warp, and then we can kind of size our image and get moving to the poster. So now that I've got my image reduced just to the black and white layer, it's time to size it up and get the print out. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I want my design to be about 11 inches wide, and you can see my current document's sized to that already. We got width just below 11 inches, and that's going to be perfect to print my design out onto. And then you also want to double check your resolution. Like I said before, 400 resolution is going to be a great large size, and you're not going to really see any grain in there even when it's zoomed in super small. So we've got resolution of 400. You're going to have to remember that. And now you have to pick the size of paper that you actually want to stretch this out to. So you can do something as simple as 2 sheets wide, so you've got 8.5 inches to use, double that, so now you got 17 inches wide, and then maybe 11 inches tall, and that would be kind of an aspect ratio a little bit longer and not quite as tall. In my case, I want to do a 4x4 sheet area, so I'm going to do 2 8.5 by 11s next to each other, and then 2 below that. So I'm going to have 8.5 in one corner, and then another 8.5 to the side of it. So I'll get about 17 inches wide there, and then 22 inches tall with the 11 down and the 11 down, and that'll be plenty to fill this entire design. So basically, I like to come in here and select my design just as is, and I can do an edit copy merged, and that will select everything and kind of reduce it down to a smaller image, as well as get rid of that extra data that you don't quite need for the print. So then I go to make a new image, and you can see it's going to default to have my selection in there. So you can see my selection was originally 13 by 18, but since we want those 2 sheets wide by 2 sheets tall, we're going to have 17 inches on our width and 22 inches on our height. And then we can hit create, and that'll create our base document that then we can just simply paste in the image, and it's the correct size already. So set yourself up for success with having the same resolution on both documents, and pick how many sheets you need to fit this in exactly how large you want the end product to be. So here we've got a pretty reduced image. This is a much smaller size, and then we can just save it off as a PDF. Done a few before this, but get the next iteration in there to make sure it's perfect. Then you can just run through the normal save as dialogues to condense that PDF. I know I've had my computer slow down and not be able to produce the file if I'm trying to do it right from the PSD. So now I'm coming into Adobe Acrobat to print this out. Super easy terminal to actually print it through. You know, basic thing to view all your PDFs with, and it's a free program as well, so no need to worry about that. And then just hit Control P or hit your little print icon, and you can bring up your printer options. So here you can see it's going to default to just your single sheet of paper as always, but if you come over here to the poster option, you can actually get the chance to tile it up. So I haven't figured out exactly how to bring this down to the 4x4 sheets I intended it for, but the printout's going to be the correct size. Kind of waste a little bit to fill this area, but you got 6 sheets to work with, and it worked out for me. If anybody has a suggestion on how to keep the 100% scale but actually have the page orientation flip up, that'd be great, because basically I'm just missing keeping this on the portrait ratio and having the 4 sheets take up the whole area needed. So now you can just hit print and get 6 sheets out and start cutting those down. Alright, we got our 6 sheets. Let's lay them up. So I ran out of paper, fortunately, so I had to print on the back side, so hopefully it doesn't cause too much confusion on what I need to cut and what I don't. So here, and now let's double check to make sure the edges are lined up and that I can actually crop off the right amount so I can just cut down those borders. So now let's chop some of these. To keep it most consistent, it looks like probably this section's the most detailed. So I'm going to start building from there and kind of just trim off all these white borders and get as close to the edge as I can. And I'd honestly like to prefer to leave some white rather than cutting off too much black. Let's preview the line up there. Very nice. And you can see using points from up here and then making sure the middle's aligned and then all the way down here at the teeth. That looks like the alignment's going to work perfect. Same goes for the rest of these. And now you can use this to make your own posters even, and split them up and then just trim them up and maybe run a line, a piece of tape around the middle, or wheat paste each individually. Forgot to check the sizing here, so let's make sure we're still sitting at that nice 11 inches. Perfect. Alright, so you can trust that sizing maneuver to make sure that your design stays as you had originally intended it. And there you go, we got the first layer perfectly lined up. Now it's time to get some tape on there. And I'm actually going to put somewhat of a stiffer backstop than this carpet to hopefully align stuff on and it doesn't press in as much. So I definitely want to line the center up the most, as if this is offset, then we have bigger problems than if the kind of fringe edges are. So I'm gonna pick the top up here, and you can see where the straight edge, here, let's get a close up here. So use the border of the actual printout to help you align. So here we've got a black line that goes right into the corner, and you can see the edge of the paper cuts it at the perfect point. So you can see where this is supposed to align up at the top, and that'll get you positioned up and down. And then kind of hold your hand there once it's good and rotate the other sheet to get this kind of the rest of the portion lined up. And then I like to have a piece of tape ready and just press that down. And get 2 down before you take your first hand off, because when you do take your first hand off, it could tend to shift, but if you got 2 down, it gives it a nice anchor and you don't have to worry about that. So from there we can then trim off a little bit of extra tape. And we can repeat with the rest. So I'm gonna pick this edge up here because that's a nice solid round that I'll be able to see how it aligns. And then also this corner here. And really double check yourself at this stage. You don't want to continue with having an offset, especially if you're gonna go for multiple layers. It quickly, becomes skewed and messed up if you have to kind of force yourself into not getting the alignment perfect. So you can see this little bit here wants to go a little bit to the right. So even if this section doesn't look like it should go to the right, let that tell you what it needs to go, because it could look also aligned a little bit offset up here. And if you're able to get every line perfect and that your original corner wasn't exactly where you thought it was supposed to be, there's no harm there. You got enough play to follow through. And then you can see this one's also nice. You got the nice corner there to get you positioned in the center. So I might have cut a little bit too much off between those two, but everything else looks to be aligned. So I'm just going to be sure to have tape totally go across that section. That's going to need a little bit more reinforcement. So there you have the first pass at the whole kind of stencil laid up. So you can see this is pretty big, like I said, about 11 inches wide. I think that'll fit perfect on some posters as well as the front of a t-shirt. And now time to set up to get cutting. Okay, so this next portion is going to be actually cutting out your stencil, and you're going to need a few more tools at this point. I mentioned before, get your X-acto blades. I needed to pick up a new set. You're going to need some spray tack, as well as the actual paper or poster that you want to cut out on. Since I'm going to be using these pretty sparingly and I don't need them to be super durable, just some kind of thicker poster paper is fine by me. My big preference here is don't go cardboard. Go for something like the poster material. They've got those big sheets to do a poster project on that are even twice or 3 times as thick as this. You can get them at the Dollar Tree or Walmart or anywhere. Those are great for this size of stencil, and those will last a lot longer than just the paper. Here I'm not planning to use this for 1,000 kind of stencils. The paper and some discipline with how often I'm actually spraying them should make these hold up for a bunch. They just won't be able to last through like a 30 or 40 stencil session. I've got this stencil mat to cut on. This is really ideal for 2 reasons. It helps you keep your blade fresh, as it's a surface that doesn't hurt the bit of metal and dull it out too fast, as well as it's kind of got a rubber texture to it, and that lets you kind of easily cut and not gouge into it, much like if you had cardboard as your backdrop. I would definitely recommend picking one of these up. I like to use it clearly as the backdrop when I'm drawing on my desk. Keeps my desk a little bit cleaner. So this is the paper my final stencil will actually go on. So before we get too much further into this tutorial, I want to talk about the need of the mesh. So when you're making a stencil, and like I've designed here, there are opportunities for your stencil to have islands. And what an island is basically a section of your pattern that's totally surrounded by white. So if we were to take this portion down here with the kind of swirl pattern, cutting out that black section, you can have the ability now to spray paint right through it, and it would spray in this area. But what happens when I also want to cut this black section out over here? Well, if I come in here and cut this black section all the way out, I've just only done that interior line. I haven't even gotten to this portion of the black yet. and the white's fallen out. So this is what we call an island. When your design has sections that you don't want any spray paint on and they're totally surrounded by areas that you do want spray paint on, all of that's going to simply fall out. But if we take a little piece of this mesh and with this mesh, you basically now have the ability to bridge sections. So you're able to get small little kind of roadways from the island back to the main portion of the stencil that allows you to still spray through here and hold this area, but not necessarily have the whole area fall out. With traditional stencils, you can make small little white lines in between the white sections to hold on to them, but this is kind of a new age way to keep the whole stencil together and have a little bit more detail on that too, because this is now way more supported than a bunch of little white lines, and it is so small and so consistent that it's going to be a little bit better than if you were to have to do this all manually. So I'm just going to do a quick spray here to show you how it will work in practice. And just going to rub this down so it holds onto the paper there. And here you got the opportunity to now put the Elmer's glue all on those white sections to hold them onto the mesh. And now I'll let that dry and I'll peel it off and show you how it looks. So here you can see you've got that small mesh, and you know the camera's not even picking it up too much, and that's pretty much similar to what the spray will do. It'll allow a lot of the spray to go right through and pass by that mesh, and then also now you've got that interior section glued on and held. So for me, that's going to allow me to have all these crazy white interior sections, add a ton more data to this image, and then not have to worry about things peeling off or making 1,000 little islands coming off this to try and support it. So back to our small cutting platform. This is our paper that we're actually going to cut the stencil out of. And what the spray tack at this point does is just hold all the little white sections in place, and then once you're ready to get the mesh on top, the small white sections that need to be glued are exactly where you need them. So I'm going to spray a light tack of the craft bond down. It says let it dry for 3 to 5 minutes and then apply the paper onto it for that temporary bond. So now I'm ready to lay the paper down, get it smoothed out. Then I'm also going to tack down the top sheet so that its position doesn't move, and then I think I'll end up having to peel off all the sections that I do cut away from this. Alright, now time to just cut all the black sections out as if it's a normal stencil. A good way to do this is start at the center and work your way out to the more extremes, and that way it's kind of at least a little bit more supported in the design where it needs to be a little bit more intricate and where more material might be cut away. So you can see the first island section right here in the nose. Every connecting piece is basically left out, and you can see we got the white section glued on there nicely. So I'll keep on moving through this. Alright, we got the finishing touches here. I'm going to start peeling off the very top layer that has the actual design on it, and that way I can make sure that all the cuts underneath are just through that last layer, and we don't need the top kind of print out afterwards. And I'm actually finishing this up the second day, and it's nice to see the glue actually held pretty well overnight, so I'm not too worried that even if you do have to do multiple sessions, bottom layer is really stuck down well. Probably not as confident about the second layer because I just did that super light tack on it, but maybe I'd say go for a little thicker tack on that second layer between your final poster as well as the one you printed the image on, just to be sure that that'll stay down throughout your cut process. And I also want to say my hand was getting super sore last night. I kind of have a bad habit of really pressing in and putting a ton of force down with the hand that I'm cutting with. And just as a slight reminder, is you're really only cutting through paper, so you don't have to use a ton of pressure. Be kind of even more cognizant about getting the tip in, and then that way you can really make sure it got through both layers, and then just slowly glide along top of the actual cutting mat, cutting board, or whatever you plan to use. And you don't have to dig into the cutting mat too much. It really just the surface cut will give you enough. Here we got one of the top layer sections coming off. So you can see 2 layers cut through there. I'll just rip it off there. And the second layer didn't quite come up yet, so just peel that up. And I like to go pretty slow at this point to make sure all the cuts are actually made. You know, sometimes the little corner pieces get a little hung up and you didn't actually cut through all the way, so making sure those are good to go and that you don't peel up any of the white section. It's always good measure to kind of double down. And I've cut through enough over here to kind of pull off these squirrelies and just freehand the last of it, so long as I can remember which sections are the black line and which sections are the whites. So this is actually only going to get better the larger you go with it, just because it's going to give you, your smallest little kind of islands here, more real estate for that mesh to glue down to. So honestly, this could scale up quite a bit larger. I'm doing a foot wide. That's realistically pretty small. My bigger stencils that I've done in the past were kind of 3 and 4 feet tall. So this definitely is a technique that'll help support those, as when they do get that large, there's a ton of new added weight to them that the regular stencil doesn't want to support, and the mesh is definitely gonna help you out there. And I might as well add some one-off features that I didn't have in the original design. Get something a little unique here. Alright, so now it's time for that roll of mesh, as well as the classic Elmer's glue. So I'm basically just going to cut the mesh down, maybe even oversize it a touch, and that way I can trim it down once I've got some areas tacked in. And this stuff is super cheap. It was like $7 or $8 for the whole roll. They had gray and then also a full black color. I'm sure you can find it in some alternates as well if needed. But I think the gray is going to work nicely, just so it gives us some contrast to the back of the stencil. Start from the top, work my way down. I might give myself a couple corners to tape down as well. But this will keep the whole piece from shifting too much. Alright, we got the scraps out of the way now. And this squeeze top, let's get at it. I'm definitely going to try and work the glue into the edges a little bit, make sure it's getting in between each of the squares. It's interesting to see the glue's a little forgiving. It doesn't want to kind of pull over the edge and into the empty area. It's basically just getting caught in the mesh and holding to that edge. Wherever your last little bit of mesh and paper is, it'll want to kind of cling to that. Now it's hard to say how much you actually need. We're just gonna roll with it and see if this works out for the first time, and then tailor it back when I do the multi-layer. Well, that's if needed, I suppose. Well, it turns out I didn't have any toothpicks laying around, so I had to run to the store. But let's get some of these out and maybe use these to push stuff into place. Get a glob started and then kind of just push the last little bit into those smaller edges. The dexterity of just the toothpick here, not really cutting it, so let's see if we can makeshift a little extender pole. Much better. I can even dab and poke it a little bit, and that way I don't have to get my face so close to each individual little piece. And I think you should be able to just kind of goop it on there and let gravity help settle it down into the cracks there. So that's a little bit more stuck down than I anticipated. Actually, in one of teacher's videos, he used a heat gun to help kind of relieve it from the final surface. So I'm going to give this a go. And like I said earlier, there are tons of other great videos about making big stencils and doing similar processes. So definitely go check out all those links in the description. Get a bunch of people's influences on the project and take a little bit from everybody. And that way you'll have kind of the best resources and best attempts to go at this yourself. So hopefully this just loosens the glue a little bit. Alright, we got some of the small sections coming up already. I suppose if I lose any points, I can always just kind of stick it back down and glue them one at a time. You can see I'm just pointing the end of the heat gun right into the kind of crease there, and just as it releases up, moving off to another section, shifting my hand over. And I'm not sure if that's the paper or the glue kind of smoking. My guess is the moisture of the glue's all the way out, but probably not so much on the paper. There we have it. So I'm really excited to see how much the kind of glue adds to the stability of this stencil, just because, you know, the normal paper would get soaked with a few pieces and a few passes, but honestly I feel like the Elmer's glue here just loaded it up plenty enough that that's going to really hold on to most of this paper, hopefully for a little while. A common practice I do like to do is do one fresh coat of maybe some extra glossy paint to really build up a first layer on this stencil, and then let that totally dry and kind of take the first pass on the paper. And that way your first session isn't going super overboard and running the chance of actually saturating this and wetting the paper too much. It'll allow it to build up one coat first off, and then all the other paint can build off of that and give it a little bit more protection than just the paper. So you definitely get this cool like 8-bit look almost with all the little mesh hits. Some sections when you do press down a little bit more, you're able to get a more solid black line, but honestly the slight hue of this adds almost some depth to it, especially in that eye right there. Could do a little cleanup up there when I was using the gray dot instead of the stock tip on that. Just quick color. But honestly, for quick color and one pass, this is looking tight. Let's go do a 2-pass hit up on just a piece of white paper, see how that works out. I'm also going to try a super light hit of some spray tack just to help set the edges down a little bit more. This is not the same permanent stuff that I was using to mount the original one. This is just a temporary spray tack. So the spray tack is super helpful in holding that piece down and getting a little bit sharper edges. So that's definitely going to be employed on the final piece. And you can see we've got some warping here where all that glue kind of bled over the edge in the thin sections. So I'll be careful of that in the future as well. But overall, man, first pass, super pumped with it. So that was a heavy set of sessions. You know, we got a few different posters I ended up with. Super excited for the color combo I'm going to be able to master up in a very similar manner to the background on that. The single colors one just came out spot on. Really excited with just the quality on the first pass of this. I think I'm going to end up redoing the black layer for the multicolor set, but the grime and the extra little hatching that comes through with the mesh just works so well with the design. So super excited about the next set. Got all the colors for the multicolor set thanks to Street Smart, so big shout out to them. You didn't see a ton of them from this video, but they're going to be the backbone for the following, so big thank you all around. Be excited to see how I can actually improve on the gluing process the next time around. I'm thinking I'm going to leverage the temporary versus permanent bond of the craft spray and hopefully not have to glue every section. The paint's slowly building up, and it seems like the paint's also helping to hold the stencil into the mesh, so it did take me probably an hour and a half maybe to glue, and with each layer that's going to add up quite a bit pretty quickly. So I'm gonna see if I can remedy in the next round using just the spray bond and not have to manually glue each and every little section, because you know, it wasn't so bad with just one, but 5 layers later, I know I'm not gonna be the happiest fan of that. As always, if anything wasn't clear in the tutorial, be sure to hit me up in the comment section down below. I'll like to read through all those and give suggestions or tips, or if you've done anything with the stencil process that's similar to using the mesh from Teacher, be sure to also you know, let me know how that works out. Some people have been hitting me up on Instagram showing me some of their more recent stencil projects, and it's really wild to see all the multi-sets and everything that everybody's getting into. Now, something also somewhat unexpected from the video was the Z-Series X-acto Blades. Man, these stayed way sharper than usual. I'm normally probably going through a whole blade for a whole stencil, and this thing's still super sharp, so gotta give a good recommendation on those as well. So maybe check those out if you're in the market for a new X-acto. Definitely seem to stay sharper a little bit longer. And I'm sure cutting on the cutting mat also helps with that. If you're cutting into something a little tougher, it's gonna wear your blade down, but cutting mat's a little forgiving on that respect. So be sure to watch out for the next video where I'm diving in to do a formal multi-layer with almost camouflage pattern styling to the skull design, and gonna be putting that probably on posters again for that video, but then following up I'm gonna see if I can also put that into a little t-shirt video, see if how the multicolor on a t-shirt works, as I've also never done that as well, so that'll be a fun kind of push for the project. Drop a like if you enjoyed the video. I'll be sure to follow up in the comments with everybody that's supporting down there. It's also wild to see that this video is coming out 10 years after my first upload here on this channel, and I'm just hitting now 100K subscribers. So big shout out to everybody that's supporting the channel and all the cool projects. It's really awesome to be able to not only engage on a level, but you know, teach everybody the techniques I'm using to make my next art project. So enjoy the next round of videos. It's really gonna do it for me, guys. Peace.